and tell me if there's questions that require answering as we go through. That would be really good. I'm sorry to make more work for you, but that is the only way that it's going to happen. And yes, the unaccredited speaker is Mr. Toast.
I'm happy to jump in if you want to be interrupted, or we can store them up and I can ask you at the end. Or if you want to, I can combine the Q&A session with you and Ian, if you're happy to stay for the duration of his talk as well, and we'll have both of you answering questions from the audience. Your call.
Interrupt.
Okay.
All right. I gave that, I'm not going to use the word I'm thinking of. I gave him breakfast twice so he wouldn't do that. All right, let's do a talk. Why I hit things for a living, which is a title on reflection that doesn't reveal a whole lot. Likewise, there's probably people in the room who haven't heard of the MEP, which is a non-profit project that I run. I'll give you the very short version now, and then we'll talk about me for a few minutes at the end, but I am not the focus of this talk. That would be boring for both of us. Suffice to say, the MEP is a funded forensic metascience project that is run by the Center for Scientific Integrity, which is the parent nonprofit in the US that also runs Retraction Watch. So CSI has some arms, and now I'm one of the arms, and Retraction Watch obviously is the much better established arm that we primarily work with. All right. This was a little challenging when it came in. Obviously, when you set up a seminar series like this, people choose their topics, and generally they choose them in the order in which they've been contacted. And either because I was contacted late, or more likely, and to Sam's great credit, he probably contacted me quite early and I missed it. So you are going to hear 3 more talks, and have already heard 1 talk, I believe, if I remember the schedule correctly, on topics that I've already spoken about. In particular, if you get to hear Nick's workshop that looks like it's happening in one of the subsequent days, I think on your Wednesday or something similar, then you're going to see a whole bunch of my actual forensic metascience work later on. So I'm not going to talk about that at all, or about open research practices, or hopefully touching on anything that Ian's going to talk about immediately after me. And these people are all better organized than me anyway. So I've decided to do something a little different. And I'm one of the few people now who is paid to do the work that you're about to see in part over the oncoming week, because it's literally my job. That's what the MEP does. And I want to introduce you to some of the elements of how that became a job, which of course have nothing to do with the project itself. This is the sort of environment in which it was created. And there are some principles there that I think are incredibly important to understand if you're thinking about why would you go to this summer school in the first place? Why does this matter? Why are we all in the room? And I don't think the broader stories, the longer stories about this are told much, because we're all scientists and we communicate in a certain format. And that format generally does not include these sort of very lengthy tales out of school that cross over into policy and how organizations work and how systems work and how incredibly annoying all of it can be when it's shaken together in a bag, as it often is. So hopefully there will be something normalizing about this. I would like that, at least. So I will shut up and interrupt myself with the actual content. First point I want to make is that research integrity is a legitimate research interest. Anyone who's capable of reading Nature or Science magazine, the news arm, is well aware of this at this point in time. We've had, I think, really since the start of COVID, because there were a lot of generative factors that were involved in a sort of the global scientific understanding of what that meant to have a pandemic that happened everywhere all at once. Everyone is more aware of this than they were 5 years ago. And it's very much a legitimate research interest. It always has been, but it's always been something that researchers have done in service of something else. So there are sort of classics of the genre, but they generally occur in a specific context. So for instance, I don't know if you're at King's College, some of you might be aware of the work of Tony Pelosi. That existed well before we had a community of people who are interested in research integrity as a research topic. And it's very, very interesting. He's given talks, I think there, or maybe it's just down the road or something, and they're excellent if you want to look them up. And all of it sort of predates more or less everything that you're about to hear. It's a fascinating case, the Hans Eysenck case. And there's a lot of other good cases. There are many people who conduct interesting and creative work in this space. And in general, not exclusively, but in general, all of this research happens because people feel like it should. Not because it's their job, but because it's interesting to them personally. Now, there are students who have research integrity flavored projects. There are obviously many of those at this point, which is just even from the perspective of a few years ago, amazing. There are projects that are in the space, but there's no such thing as an endowed chair of forensic metascience anywhere on the planet. There's no department that does this. It's never been in anyone's job description from any academic hire anywhere in the world. We're interested in hiring someone who studies what we're about to talk about. And in the context of that collective disinterest, there are very few people who are paid to find academic problems proactively, because all of the systems that we have, universities, countries, governments, etc., that deal with the problems in research are all reactive systems. They all wait for something to happen and then they act. They do not go out into the world and look for problems. Reactive systems are waiting for someone to bring them problems. Now, how does that work in all the different contexts? Obviously, every university, at least every real university, has a research integrity officer. And they have a tremendous amount of discretionary power within a university. The first one is what I call the discretion to ignore, which is basically if you say, excuse me, research integrity officer, we have a problem at your university. They appear to be, I don't know if the legislation obviously differs from country to country, they appear to have the discretion to ignore you completely. Or at the very least, that's reasonably normative. And I don't mean that they pay no attention to you, that the email goes completely unanswered. I mean, they'll answer your email and say, thank you very much for pointing out a research integrity problem at this institution. We'll get back to you. Do they? I don't think they have to. That's the discretion to ignore. If they have a problem and they wish to ignore that problem, one of the primary tricks they use is what we call artificial scope. So, for instance, let's say, and this has literally happened to me, we send a dossier of problems to a research integrity officer at a university, and they say, that's terrible, we're going to investigate. And then they look into it, and they set up an investigation to answer a specific question. And the specific question is not really what you're asking about. It's a good example would be something like, is there any prima facie evidence that this untrustworthy work was fabricated? As opposed to, is it just terrible? Or in fact, is there no evidence of that except for what's actually in the paper itself, which is clearly impossible? So they pull the data out of the lab, and they attempt to do their own forensic analysis, and eventually conclude that there's no evidence that fabrication took place at that institution, and they conclude that. Well, the paper's still wrong, and the results in the paper are still impossible. But their investigation has just concluded we can't prove that something untoward happened here. And there are some famous cases that I don't have time to go into where universities have done that, and then the problem has grown, and then they've had to come back and do a second, or in some cases a third investigation as the problems have become more serious, which makes you wonder what they were doing with the first two. But the answer is usually artificial scope. Next point, they can always wait and see. Well, this happened. Let's see if it gets worse. Just leave it. They're happy to leave it for 6 months. And the last point, of course, is you have to have empathy for the job that research integrity officers and the people who work with them are doing at universities. Sometimes they have other jobs. Sometimes they're roped into committees that they don't sit on. Sometimes they are essentially volunteering, like many other academic jobs, volunteering their time, and in what they have available, they will try to conduct an investigation. And the resources for this are very variable between universities, public-private institutions, countries, supra-country kind of systems as well. Like there are some EU mechanisms for interest sake. So you never know what you're going to get. You're in a perpetual Forrest Gump box of chocolates situation when you contact a university RIO. Governments are also all over the place. Famously in Australia, where I am from, we do not have a formal government accountability mechanism at all. There are cases that are referred to other bodies within the government that handle corruption, as famously happened recently to a researcher in Queensland. But we do not actually have a formal research integrity body at a governmental level. We do in the US, and opinions on it are mixed. Generally, regardless of where it is in the world, this is not a well-funded or a well-publicized department. But the most variability can be seen in publishers. Now, if you send a research integrity problem to a publisher, again, in this reactive process, it can go anywhere from, oh my God, that's terrible, we'll get right on that, and they do, to ignoring you completely for potentially years. Some of the responses in this area are good, and some of them are terrible, and some of them are in between. In general, though, if there's a good part about this, it's that whoever is responsible for research integrity at a publisher generally knows something about it. The central problem that we have there, when we have a person who you can talk to about these problems, is generally that they are somehow disempowered, which is a long way of saying that is a company that contains senior management and lawyers, and both of them will fight you like cats to not deal with a problem that you've noticed and are talking about. All right, that sets our groundwork. Now we can go quicker. So basically, this is a self-regulatory system. These are incredibly well studied in other commercial contexts. Here in the UK, think your famous sewage system, but oil and gas, farming, etc. All over the world, everyone's interested in figuring out exactly how well they work. And the answer generally is not very well. A good self-regulatory system has, I wish I could remember where I pinched this from. This is a slide I've had before. Transparency, meaningful benchmarks, accountability, and oversight. And all of those things mean generally mandatory reporting mechanisms, measurement of those reporting mechanisms, the ability for anyone to see inside of the process, and some kind of oversight into how well this industry, in this case research integrity, how well it is performing the tasks that it is supposed to do itself. So we have a self-regulatory mechanism. How are we doing on making sure that it works over time within the space and the context of the week that you're about to have? The answer is badly. Probably should have put an underline on badly, because we're going to talk about badly now in some detail. So I want to show you just exactly how deep the rabbit hole can go here. And you will see the techniques involved in this, the actual mechanics of this, starting in 2015, which to my lasting horror is almost 10 years ago. when you speak to Nick later, because the tests that he's going to talk about are the pieces that make up the actual investigation in this timeline. I'm not even going to tell you what they are. I just want you to see how long all of this took. It took us about a month to look at 10 papers from one researcher, write a dossier, and send it to the French Psychological Society. Now, they were actually pretty involved in the process, but they have a society like that doesn't have a lot of power a lot of the time. They can make recommendations, they pass that to the institution refers that to the CNU. Months later, the author talks to the CNU, they have follow-up questions to the author responds. You notice that there's months and months between these individual dates. That's already 2 years in. The case eventually goes public, a little bit over 2 years. There's an initial inquiry and initial report. There's a second inquiry and a second report. I had to give evidence at one of these. It was very strange. Months after that, we complain about the lack of retractions. The first one happens, it was 4 and a bit years in, and then there was an expression of concern 6 months later, and then there was a second retraction that happened 4 months after that. And then it took another 6 months, and there was a third retraction. But bear in mind, this is on a dossier of 10 papers, and we only stopped at 10 because that's all we could be bothered doing at the time. Then there were additional expressions of concern, and then at some point in time, in May a couple of years ago, which bear in mind itself is now more than 2 years ago, I stopped filling out this timeline because I got bored, and frankly, you can't read it and it doesn't fit on a PowerPoint slide anymore. I'd have to just reformat all of it, and I can't be bothered. For me, this is my first postdoc, my second postdoc, getting promoted, being a research scientist. The plague starts. I leave. I join a startup. We run that for years. We do a bunch of work for the US government. That startup folds. I join a second startup. And this is one of the primary reasons that a lot of these problems just seem to go away to some degree. At this point in time, I am not a person at an institution who has a stable job where everything is fine and I can just continue to work and answer emails about this for years. I probably have 5 individual emails over this point in time. And the only reason all of this was closely followed up is because, frankly, Nick did it. It was too hard to keep track of. And when I'm talking about inertia here, this is what I'm talking about. The grinding down effect of just exactly how long a research integrity case can go for, and how slow this is, and how many individual different governmental and private and public and semi-public bodies are involved, and how they all issue reports to each other, and just how long everything takes. That is, I think, 90 months in total. And I don't know if it's resolved yet because I didn't check, nor will I, because at some point in time you make your peace with the fact that this is not a particularly effective system, and you give yourself permission to walk away from it. It will, however, maybe it's worth a look in when it's a decade old this November. This is not just this case. This is the research integrity environment doing its absolute best to not exist in any functional capacity. There is no stated timeline that anyone has to keep to. If there is a stated timeline, generally the stated timeline is not something that is enforced in the same way that people may be surprised by this, but there's lots of government mandates where the government says, okay, all researchers, for instance, in the US here, take in NIH money. You all have to make your data open and publish everything in an open format all the time. And we have mandatory data accessibility requirements, and we have paper accessibility requirements. Does anyone check if those are met? Not really. A university will send a circular and say, this is the new legislation. And then everyone, a lot of the time, does what they were going to do anyway, because there is no enforcement. It's a self-regulatory mechanism. There's no one is doing PubMed searches for, okay, you were funded out of this grant. Are all the resources from the grant available? Literally no one is checking. And if literally no one is checking, tons of stuff falls through the cracks. And this is what the checking process looks like. 90 months of waiting around, and man, it is a good thing that I spent most of it not taking any kind of personal interest in this, because it would have driven me crazy. All right, I'm going to check for questions. Give me 1 second. Looks like we're good. All right. So, second story. I like this one because this one has a little bit of everything.
1 second, James.
Go for
Sorry.
it.
We have one question from the floor. Let me just, if you just... No, we've got the mic. Just 1 sec. No need to speak loud.
Sorry, just one question about the stories that you've got there. Does it go to specific journals or publications where you've identified, like what I hear sometimes is this is a top journal, that's a second journal, you know, in terms of standards. Do you all have that criteria? And is that what you all look for when you all check for integrity of research papers that are published?
Okay, in a collective sense, if you're saying I wish to go out and use a mechanism to find problems because either I wish to test the mechanism or it's just the right thing to do. Generally, we don't give, unless it is a total garbage tier journal, in which case you can probably safely ignore it because no one's going to read it, no one's going to cite it. There's a point past which it would just be far too much work than it is ever worth to look carefully at something published in a sort of grey literature journal. Beyond that, if you're doing the sort of academic work here, we do not care about journal quality at all. I think it's far more likely that something in a higher tier of journal, for whatever that is worth and however that's defined, but we all know essentially what that means. I think it's far more likely that an individual case will be pursued properly. Your motivation is higher generally because you think more people will see the paper, because it's more likely to have an effect, an impact in some way on the field that the paper's published in. So that is more motivating when it comes to individual papers themselves. In the case of this specific timeline, the papers were all over the map. Some of them were in reasonably well-recognized journals, some were in reasonably obscure journals. I think all of the journals were contacted fairly early. So they would have known for a very long time. But they were also very likely told, don't worry about this, we'll get back to you when we're finished investigating. You don't have to do anything right now, just chill, let us finish our investigation. And then eventually they made these recommendations. I mean, actually making the recommendations here. That itself took just about 3 years. And then they very likely sent an email circular and then never followed up. And journals have a tendency not to push things to the top of the queue. If you do that, good, bad, or indifferent. I think that covers everything in the question.
Any other questions from the floor before? No, you're good, James. Carry on. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's talk about big screw-ups and big money. So everyone's probably heard, unless you're a very fresh PhD student, you've probably heard the name Hindawi before. It's named after the dude who started it, who had quite a nice goal originally, which was, let's start an open access journal group that is more accessible, it's more available to people in the global south, that is serving the needs of people who just do not have publication outlets right now. And it started a very long time ago and was built up fairly substantially. By the point in time, at about the year 2000, give or take, I think there were about 400 individual journals in the journal group. And they look more or less like anyone else. They have staff, they're in a number of different cities. It isn't just like 3 people in a garage. It is a global enterprise at that point in time. They have revenue, they have costs. It's a real company. And the publisher Wiley, as in John Wiley from New Jersey, just down the road from where I am right now, started in the 19th century, thousands of global staff, blah, 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 have traditionally had almost no open access publishing. And they read the room a few years ago and go, we don't have really any open access capacity. I mean, it was led before they bought Hindawi, I think it was 4% of everything they published was open access. It's a very old school, rigid, traditional publisher. So they buy Hindawi and it costs $300 million, give or take, 300 million US dollars. And that was announced in 2021. And then over the next 18 months, they managed to integrate both of these journals. This is also, bear in mind that a lot of this was, especially early, was the interesting part of COVID-19. Initially, they have what is reported in forms to the SEC as very good growth. And in August 2022, they actually discover themselves that they are getting absolutely smashed with paper mill submissions. I imagine this will come up at some other point in time over the ensuing week, if it hasn't already. Paper mills are commercial organizations that fabricate papers for money, generally according to a template. So they notice this problem. It becomes all hands on deck. They plan 500 retractions to begin with, which is an astonishingly large amount of retractions by itself. They realize that what is happening is that people are opening up special issue submissions at their journals, filling those with garbage, and then submitting all of them in one hit. So a lot of the time they're getting 30, 60 papers at a time through what is basically a dishonest submission process at that point. So they pause their special issues completely. Claravit, who are the impact factor people, kills a whole bunch of their journals 6 months after that. They shut another 4 of them themselves. The CEO resigns, and by the end of 2023, the Hindawi brand can't continue. They kill the brand completely. If you go to Hindawi journals now and click on the papers, it will just say Wiley Publishing. The brand is gone. May of last year, the total number of retractions, which a journalist calculated at the Wall Street Journal, is 11,300. That is easily the largest retraction case in history. And bear in mind, someone bought this for $300 million while it was happening. And as we are hopefully in this room empirically minded, the question immediately presented itself to me. Did they get all of them? I mean, that's 11,300. Should it be more? Like, did they finish the job? That's the question that I wanted to answer a while ago. So I thought it would be fun to look. While I was writing this talk, I found another one. This is published in the February 2023 in the Journal of Census, which is one of the ones that was beaten up very badly by the mill submissions. In a classic paper mill genre, which is the Internet of Things. There's an awful lot of algorithms and Internet of Things papers that were in this. So incredibly suspicious topic in the first place. And that was retracted last week or the week before. And you can just go now to the Wiley archives. And if you have access to the problematic paper screener, which you do because it's open, you can browse through all the things they miss. And I've kept a few of my favorite phrases from these papers. Calling a stroke a cardiovascular disappointment is now a favorite of mine. It's an ecology paper that refers to bugs as creepy crawlies. And this one here, I didn't even get around to highlighting all of the wonderful pieces of this. The proposed method, named Tainting Length Mindful Irregular Woods, incorporates a 3-degree decision tree to cut subjects into explicit organizations depending on the size of aroused sores. How did I not highlight aroused sores? And dictated via arbitrary timberlands in order for every enterprise. And obviously you can see the things from the confusion matrix out of the bottom are now affectability, particularity, and exactness.
James, sorry to disrupt your flow. I think
you're good.
The slides is stuck on the Hindawi debacle slide. So I don't know whether you, yes, okay. We can see, yeah.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. That's just teams being teams. You know, you buy the computer, it has Windows installed, you get what you pay for. Great. My point being, and I'm sorry you couldn't see that, just inhale the decency of the language there and exactly what's going on. If they're retracting things recently and these things still exist and these are unretracted papers, they very definitely, completely unlike Pokemon, did not in fact catch them all. It looks like they missed several. And it doesn't stop with this slide. There's a whole lot more that could actually be put on here. I've got my favorite here. The pathologist's representation results of the anticipated tissue biopsy or fine needle yearning in the obsessive conclusion of bosom malignancy as indicated by the pathologist. Clearly, that is not a real paper. Still published, still unretracted. It's going to be 3 years soon, in a couple of weeks. So obviously they made statements about how this happened, what the process was from the inside. And it includes several really alarming pieces of information. Although several downstream checks were in place at multiple steps along the workflow to publication, this process relied to some extent on the inherent trust. Okay, several downstream checks. There was one issue of this journal. This journal is no more. It was just cancelled. It doesn't exist anymore, which rarely happens to journals, but this one was so badly infected they just needed to get rid of it. There are 62 papers in the issue, and when these came in to this fake special issue, they were submitted, reviewed, returned to the authors, and then the authors managed to return their edits in a meantime of about 20 days. And if it feels like, in general, hang on, my peer reviewers for my papers aren't even assigned within 20 days, yes, it is astonishingly suspicious. So these several downstream checks did not at any point in time involve, say, looking at the basic metrics that are on the front of every single paper. And Hindal used to have a format where that was written right on the front, so you could just look at the paper and see when it came in, when it was reviewed, when it was published, etc. No one ever looked at any of the publication metrics for any of these articles. That's the only conclusion you can make. And whatever the several downstream checks were, they did not include looking at the front page of the papers. Doesn't seem ideal. Likewise, and I guess I've already made this point, an initial investigation probably a couple with new analytical capabilities afforded by the in-house peer review system. If there are new analytical capabilities, they have still not got as far as what I can do in 20 minutes with 1 cup of coffee, which is reading the things that haven't been retracted yet and seeing whether or not they just make sense to read. There are likely hundreds more that haven't been done. I think that's a reasonable estimation if I can find a dozen and only keep the funny ones in a single cup of coffee time frame. So that's not great. And why is it so incredibly ungreat? Partly it's a competence issue, but only partly. Academics who work in research integrity have a perspective on this that is sort of, how can they be so bad at their jobs? Everyone at a research integrity office is clearly just like, they go to work and they just staple their hands to the desk and sit there for 8 hours and then pull the staples out and go home. What are these people doing? It isn't just that, although it clearly is that to some degree. Part of it is legal. Part of it is the fact that when you have a large organization, there is an astonishing amount of inertia within that organization. Anyone in front of you there's people who work in university administration or have some contact with it in the audience right now. I can't see you, but I know you're nodding. Large organizations have inertia. Anyone who's worked for federal government will tell you exactly the same thing, because they do. They have to make a decision. The decision has to go to someone else. It has to be reviewed. It has to go to a committee. Someone steps in. You have to fight that person because they have some different idea to you. Eventually, something happens. Small organizations are nimble. Large organizations become increasingly slow. There's 60 years of management theory about it. And the last thing, of course, is strategy. If you retract this many papers and you look bad and you lose millions of dollars, and they did lose millions of dollars in submission fees and were also sued by their own shareholders for sort of collective negligence. I mean, this got the CEO of a multinational company, this retraction case. So you can understand why, although they shouldn't, but you can understand why they might get to a point where they went, okay, scientific integrity be damned, this is enough. Our strategy now includes portraying the fact that this is over, because this is how we wish to be seen by the shareholders and the markets and the rest of the world. Let's just keep going forward and not worry about it anymore. Maybe those new in-house checks we've heard so much about will find all the papers. Clearly they haven't. So roll all this together so far. There is a good point, and there is a good point to Wiley's credit. They figured this out themselves. I mean, they could have figured it out a lot earlier because PubPeer exists, and some of this information was in the public domain if they'd actually had a subscription to PubPeer and reviewed the stuff they were publishing. Either after they'd bought the company, or better still, before they spent $300 million on the company, they might have found out that this was a problem in the first place. They already had a problem, continued to make it worse for 18 months, and then figured it out. But at least they did figure it out and act. And the reason that these reactive systems that I've just now spent 35 minutes complaining about, the reason that they act generally is that there is a tipping point on kind of reputation loss. And this was way, way, way to the right of the typical tipping point. In general, it's in everyone's interest, except ours, the science people, to do nothing. It takes less time, it's less expensive, you don't get to look bad. And that's really the center of it. They don't have to act because they're not required to act. Until, of course, you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of problematic articles and everything goes completely to hell, at which point in time, especially if you're a public company, you do have to act because there are a different set of laws. The last thing I'd ask you to keep in mind is the fact that these are very big companies where very large amounts of money are involved. And this is, to people in publishing, not a massive failure of scientific integrity. It is a loss of revenue, a change in strategy, something that requires extra resources in the whoever is doing the research integrity department stuff. It's a completely separate kind of question where just for a minute, our interests were all collectively aligned and they had to do something. And this is why I hit things for a living. I'm not getting emotional, I just struggle talking for long periods of time without coffee. So the Medical Evidence Project is born from everything that I've just been talking to you about so far. And these are all the nice things that people have written about it in the last couple of months, blah, blah, blah. You can Google it. If there's one thing that I would like to do and one thing that I would like to impress upon you, if you do work that is in this area, is the requirement that you find an interface for doing this work where you get to overcome inertia. Is it even possible to do forensic science quickly, accurately, effectively? I would say yes, because I found a way to do it, and that is to concentrate on papers that really matter because they kill people, and because I'm doing work now that doesn't access any of the systems that I've just mentioned. It's designed to sidestep and ignore this environment entirely. And I have very good reasons to do so. Now, I said I'd talk very briefly about what I'm doing. That literally concludes me talking about what I'm doing. But the broader point here for everyone is, as you are learning what you are about to learn, if you're going to do the work, I would strongly advise you to do it in a way where you are reasonably certain that you are producing effective outcomes. Working on problems where you can actually make a difference when your work is concluded. Trust me, it feels a lot better as well. There's a particular kind of crazy making aspect that happens in work like this, both to me and to people that I talk to, who are a lot of the time are whistleblowers, where they have really serious concerns and then they are really seriously ignored. Sometimes for months or years, sometimes by people that they work with, sometimes by institutions that they trust. And that is a feeling that is best avoided, because it is astonishingly destabilizing, both to you personally and also to the career that you have. That's really the summary here. As you're learning all of this, and you're presumably interested in doing the work, think about ways to be effective. Stuck the landing, Sam. I'm finished.
Great dismount, James. Thank you so much. Right. Well, I'll give you a virtual round of applause. So ready for it? This is hopefully that's worth the subscription to Teams that we pay lots of money for. So thanks, James. Now, does anybody have any questions online or in person that would like to ask James? Feel free to raise your hands. Oh, you've got one here from Miss Big Little Lies herself, Angelica. So go ahead.
Thanks for your talk. This was very interesting. I was just wondering, because your nonprofit organization specifically is interested in medical research, how you're and you're based in the US, as far as I understand. What is your perception of the current political landscape that you're working in? And do you see any like difference in like your investigations and your like forensic investigations?
That is a really good question that I've had a few times. Happily, I had the foresight as all of this was coming in to not want to have a US specific organization. Retraction Watch does not just cover US news, although it's easier for us to cover. But it's easier to find people to comment on it. It's easier to understand. We know the processes. We know how the grant making works. A lot of the time, we know the people who are the American responsible party that can be accessed at any publisher or organization. But at the same time, when I started this, I did not ever want a focus on just the US. The US is 4% of the world's population, and it's a higher percentage of the research, a little bit less than a third. But I mean, call me a miserable old hippie, but I think bad research that makes people sick or dead matters everywhere. I mean, I will spend most of this week reading Japanese drug regulatory documents, for instance, because my life is incredibly exciting. So far, I haven't had any contact with the system that you're describing. And I'm sure that if they discovered exactly what I'm working on, which they probably won't, because I don't think I'm a priority for them, they would also run screaming from the room. Although, given like the focus recently on like, vaccine stuff and fluoride stuff, there is probably a point in time where it's sufficiently bad. There is sufficiently bad medical content involved in a public discussion where I will want to talk about that research. We want to investigate things that are within that domain. That hasn't happened yet because I'm largely writing the analysis pipelines that we're going to work with, hiring the people to be in the organization. I've only been going about 6 weeks. So it's coming. Angelica, basically we'll find out. I imagine that when it does happen, it will be easier to do that work than it is elsewhere, simply because we have the context and the contacts. It's a good question.
James, any other questions? Oh yeah.
Hello. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you. I found a lot of that really validating as someone who's always been very, very openly confident to bring up issues and then feeling repeatedly gaslit and hitting my head against brick walls, the whole like troublemaker and that kind of thing. You mentioned doing things in a way where you're reasonably sure you will have actual impacts and outcomes. And I wondered if you had advice on ways of doing that. And also with the kind of work you're doing, obviously you're doing this professionally. Is it something, are there ways of people kind of getting involved? I can imagine kind of reading papers and at least highlighting them to the right people is probably something myself and a lot of other fun, nerdy people would love to do as a hobby, if that's something that is out there.
Yeah, that's possible. Who am I speaking to?
Oh, sorry, my name's Lucy. I'm a pharmacy student.
Hello, Lucy. The first thing you said about feeling gaslit, I completely understand from the perspective as someone who has never met a lot of topics they did not wish to aggressively pursue, and then encountering resistance. I do understand exactly how crazy making that is. But more than once, I have had people who found me somehow on the internet, call me, usually on Signal or something else, and get through the conversation and then cry a bit on the phone, just because it was a relief for someone to understand what they did and take them seriously. And that still happens. I mean, I literally put time aside out of the daily schedule that I have. It's like, this is to talk to whistleblowers. And generally, people can get emotional about that because no one's listening to them. And a lot of the time they are real experts with real concerns. As you can probably imagine, after being ignored for a while, that hits pretty hard. And that's good. That is sort of one of the services that we offer. What you're talking about on a formal basis, I don't have the bandwidth to set a program like that up. However, anything that is dangerous, anything that is problematic, and pharmacy would very definitely be something that came under our remit. That is part of the sort of broader sphere of medicine, absolutely. Anything like that can come to us. And I do not mind under what format it comes in. People bring me things so far and say, I'm very proud of this work. I want to be identified with it in public. We can collaborate. I would like you to help me do this. But if we write anything, I want to be an author. I want to be identified with this because it's a cool thing I did. To which my response is, that's dope. Let's do that. You're in charge. Tell us what help you need. I've also had other people drop basically a dossier of stuff on me and go, I was never here. I don't want to talk to you. You don't even get to find out my name. Read all this stuff. I'm out. Also fine. Completely agnostic as to where things come from. So with that in mind, if there are things, I have a tip line that's literally tips@medicalevidenceproject.org. I have the browser window open right now because I have something that I need to reply to. Anything that comes out like that can be sent to me immediately, and it can be handled in any way that is mutually agreeable for us. In general, what I end up doing is giving people advice on how to deal with it themselves so far. Some people have brought me complete things that they've done. They're like, this is a problem. I agree, and you've outlined it perfectly. Why are you telling me? It's because I don't know what to do with it. Okay, I'll tell you what to do with it, and then we don't need to talk about it anymore because you'll be away. Anything is possible. I'm happy to take anything that is incoming like that. Usually on the basis that I'm going to put the email in the chat right now. Anything that comes through that, I will read. Generally, there's something that can be done, and generally I can give people advice. But you are most welcome to send me anything that you like. And that goes for literally everyone else who is here. I see we had 93 people. Oh, look at that. We've actually gone up rather than down while I was talking. What a brave new world. And all the people in the room as well. It's an open invitation. It's literally part of my job now. Wrote it into the budget. So someone else is paying for the time that you are perfectly welcome to access.
Brilliant. What an offer. Thank you so much, James.
Thank
We
you.
have any other questions, virtual or physical? Any other? I have one, James, actually, if you don't mind. I guess it's poorly formulated, so forgive me if it's a bit ropey, but I guess.
Oh, get rambling and discursive. Let's get interesting.
Well, it's basically a question about accountability and whether that is an effective way to get things moving. So some people may do an angry blog post, others might do a peer review, anonymous or otherwise, just to make people uncomfortable, and then that might grease the wheels, as it were. But I don't know whether that is a good use of time or if there's more effective ways to get sort of things moving, or maybe I'm probably speaking naively about how effective I think accountability is these days.
Okay. That was wonderfully unclear, Sam, but happily I know how to answer it. What we, within the people who are listening to this in both of these formats, what we will often fail to realize as we go forward is how little the general scientific public and the general public understand about what is presently happening in research. I wrote a very long time ago, I wish I could find this blog post, it's one of those things that's sort of lost to the depths of time. There is a tremendous amount of ground still yet to cover in terms of, does everyone understand what is going on here collectively? Do governments understand? Do people understand? Do researchers understand? Do doctors understand? Do people in allied health understand? Do we all collectively understand that we have a global research integrity crisis? The answer's still not really. It's gotten a lot better though, and we've watched it change. So when you do things like write a pub peer post or get pissed off on the internet, you are putting bricks in that wall. And it is very important that we continue to do so. Effectiveness comes in many forms. And you may have to try. If you write a pub peer post and then you send it to an editor and nothing happens, don't just, one, assume you don't need to do that anymore. I would do one of two things. First of all, sort of evaluate your approach. How did you find it? How long did it take? If you found one thing sort of purely by accident, this is a serious integrity problem, and you wrote to a bunch of people and they ignore you. Okay. Refine your approach. Change how long it takes for you to actually do the work that you've done in the first place. Treat it as a process. That's what I mean about being effective. Like, if it took you a month to do one, it took us a very long time to learn how to do this. And now there's resources on it. I wrote a whole damn book about it. You can very quickly get to a point where you can do it quicker and you can have more impact if you continue to do it and you evaluate and reevaluate your approach. And none of it doesn't matter. All of it matters. Maybe it matters in a very small degree, but I think most published papers themselves matter in a very small degree. They matter a lot to us personally because they're about things that we care about. But I care about bad research just as much as I care about the research that I've done myself, which obviously I did for many years, that I hope is good. And there are a lot of people who will tell you, explicitly or otherwise, to not care about it. With the best will in the world, they're wrong, we're right. Keep doing it and figure out ways to do it better. That's what I mean by being effective. Now, before you have a chance to cut me off, I have a question about a lack of understanding of the global integrity crisis. How can we actually educate, raise awareness to the masses about these issues to get our point across without completely discrediting science and having the public distrust research? That is a superb question, especially for the year 2025. Here is the thing that I would say. We are not engaged in trying to kick science down a flight of stairs. We are trying to make it better. That has to be your frame. And if you find that you are doing the work because you are embittered and angry and everything is terrible, you should probably stop, because it's also going to come out in how you do the work itself, how you communicate about it, what the message that you're sending is. The answer, William, very simply, is to message like hell around what you're doing in the first place. If we all do this, it will get better and we will deserve money and public prominence and things like that, because this is the process of active improvement. Science as a process, as a sort of a global community, always presupposed the idea that we could make it better by giving it a good kick from time to time. That was always part of it. It was always supposed to be part of it. It's in everything that you can read about the organized skepticism and the ethos, etc. It's supposed to be in there. And in the kind of global quest to put as many words as possible in order to access money and career advancement, it's obviously slipped, because it's far too easy to put words in order and be rewarded for it now. So, I mean, message like hell really is the answer. You have to give a frame for what you're doing and tell people that this is part of a trust-giving exercise, and when you're finished, it will be better. That's the whole reason to do it in the first place. Like, there's a real misconception about research integrity stuff, that it's full of sort of embittered, angry people. It's like something I only realized recently, is that I wouldn't do this if I wasn't an optimist. I mean, I'm occasionally dyspeptic, but I'm still a goddamn optimist. Why would you try and improve a process that you think would, like, irreparably failed? It just, the psychology of that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. You know, I don't go in and try to improve homeopathy research because it's magic water nonsense. There's no point trying to make it better. It is a house built on sand, and the sand isn't even real because it's diluted too much. It's complete nonsense from space. And so, you know, it's something that I'd never do. There's no point trying to improve that. What improvement could there possibly be? The improvement would be it's stopping. So, I mean, you can criticize, but there's no need to get involved. It is a very good question. I have a sort of a half-finished presentation that's entirely about that. But yeah, this will be seen through the framing with which you present it in and stuff that you participate in. It is possible to have a crisis. I mean, what are you supposed to do about a crisis? Do you go, that's terrible, and then drink a glass of rosé and watch as it becomes a larger crisis? You know? Or do you put some leather gloves on and start punching it? You do that if you want something to change, but you need to communicate to people why you want it to change and what it's supposed to mean when you do the work. Great question.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll finish on that. And I think that's a great note to finish. Science advances with one dyspeptic optimist at a time. If you do have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sure James will probably stay around for a little while. If not, you can always email him. He's always kindly given you his email. I'm trying to keep to time, so inheriting the delay that I introduced earlier in the day. So we'll shift over to Ian. So thank you again, James. Shall we just give James a round of applause? I don't know.
Golf clap. Golf clap. Oh, I heard one. I heard a clap. All right, that's my clap. No one else gets that clap.
It's not just me here. Right. Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks again, James. So if you disappear, and then we'll get Ian up next. Ian, show yourself.